When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: The Witness, Part 2. User: VA703. Posted March 11th, 1998.
As Ida and I dove away from everything I had ever known, a line of twinkling lights formed in the void ahead. The closer we got, the more detail I could make out. Cubes opening and closing as they twirled in space. What I had taken for a simple line quickly proved to be much, much more. A galaxy's worth of whirling boxes, parting like a curtain to show some ineffable silvery land on the other side. I struggled to comprehend what I was seeing, and as I did, a panoply of serpentine limbs, each big enough to dwarf anything on Earth, if not the planet itself, rose up from the bottom of the rift. They were clearly part of a whole, beginning to undulate in concert as if to distract us from the strange country behind them. Each of the vast limbs I could now see were honeycombed with an uncountable number of cold alien eyes, blinking out of rhythm with one another. Its movements became more aggressive, striking out towards us. Starlight lit its patterned eyes, revealing in them an intelligence so complex it threatened to smash my sanity to pieces. Still, we were accelerating. Revulsion grew in me. The blinking orbs began to look like suckers, puckering in anticipation of fresh prey. Ida, sensing my distress, moved to block the serpent from view. A flood of calm released the pressure behind my eyes. When I saw the writhing limbs again, they were far behind us, settling back to rest. What was that, Ida? Giza, guardian of the border. It was terrifying. I thought I was going to go mad. You were. Many have. I thought you said humans have never been here. Certain substances and dream states allow for the projection of consciousness to the borderlands. All stop at Giza. Those who return to their bodies are marked. They fear patterns like those on its body. You will experience this upon waking. I thought you said you'd keep me safe. Physically, yes. Your soul, however, is molded by experience. That I cannot change. We were soaring over a silvery landscape in constant flux. Oddly shaped columns would rise up to form needle-like points. Those points would then dissolve into gossamer webs blown by wind until they jointed others, forming thousands of intricate lattices. They twisted in the invisible current, warping and stretching. Some collided with other emerging columns, wrapping around them in a lover's embrace. Those would grow larger still, stretching upward 100 times higher before the process repeated. The remaining free lattices either passed out of view or drifted back to rejoin the silver mass which had originally been their home. Ida, what are your people exactly? You said, "Be not afraid." That's a biblical phrase. Are you... I let the question hang, uncomfortable with speaking the word. I wasn't a Christian, and the idea that they'd been right all along wasn't a comforting one. I chose those words because their relationship to faith makes them comforting for some. I am not an angel. Such things do not exist, not as you understand them. Then what are you? 1,000 more lattices bobbed on the alien landscape. Sufficient words do not exist in your language to explain in full. We were an ancient people. Our history stretches back long before even the first age of humanity. We were approaching a place where silver columns no longer rose, and the surface was broken by promontories of brilliant crystal. The first age, the second age, I don't know what those mean. What you believe to be the beginning of life on your planet is not. The first organisms to crawl from primordial seas also spread across the land and created wonders. Some made their way to the stars, colonizing the planet you now call Mars. Those starfarers were forced to watch as war broke out on their homeworld, technologically advanced weaponry scouring it bare of life. Though they strived to avoid it, the Martian colony fell to the same rancor and was itself extinguished. Earth drew the physical remains of your first age back into its molten core. In time, the second age began. Your stories of long ago technological civilizations such as Mu and Atlantis are genetic memories of what was lost. A jagged surface of stark, clear stone rose into a mountain range so high it blocked out everything else. Ida wreathed around me, and I felt us floating upward at great speed. When they released me and I could see again, we were traveling above a valley through which a river of red and black flame surged. It reminded me of lava I'd seen on the Discovery Channel, except it had no heat at all. Why does this fire burn? What must have been 100 miles of the churning flames raged beneath us. I wondered if they hadn't heard me. It's not fire. This reply was said softly, completely unlike anything else Ida had told me to this point. I decided not to press them further on the topic. We continued to follow the river's snaking course, its deep red glow amplified by the valley's gleaming walls. It was one of the most beautiful things I'd seen, something I thought best to keep to myself. Unless... Ida, can you read my thoughts? They responded quickly to this, as if eager for a change of subject. I cannot. Our communication is limited by my understanding of your words. There isn't some universal language that mankind just doesn't know yet? There was once, a tongue given to all by beings even older than us. The first language, meant to bind creation together in common purpose. Of the many worlds, few remember it even existed. A lesser, power-hungry entity known as the Demiurge scattered its secrets throughout the galaxy, erasing almost all memory of its existence. Your legends call it atomic. Our name for it translates to the One. Why, out of all the species, do our two remember it? Is it this genetic memory again, like Atlantis? My people remembered because we worked diligently to preserve history. We believed that without a deep connection to the past, our future was rudderless. This obsession slowed and eventually halted our development. You remembered because a spark burns inside the souls of a man. It is a living connection to the One. It allows you to freely build a future without being shackled to what has come before. Despite your physical frailty and short lifespans, you live as if your existence was eternal. The valley we had been following for so long opened up, revealing a lake of that same cold red and black fire, smooth, curved, tube-like structures organized in such a way as to suggest the layout of a city, many of them crushed and leaning drunkenly against one another, poked up from its surface. When we discovered you in your first age, many came to admire you. After your fall and resurrection, something which we have documented in no other world, admiration became love. We wondered what you could be if your lifespans were longer and you had more time to develop. What could you achieve? We planned to build a paradise where you could live as long as you wished, safe from the fear of death. You would be well kept and provided for. Like pets? Cherished pets with no wants or cares. It would be voluntary. Those who approach the beach would be given the choice, the unknown or eternity in a paradise free of conflict and full of possibility. Well, what happened? An even more irregular protrusion rose from the liquid fire, high above any other. It took me a moment, but my overworked brain quickly assembled the image in front of me. I was looking at a stark, white tower of carapace-like bones. War.
Subject: The O'Neill Funeral. User: The Irish Bye Bye. Posted August 16th, 1997.
First off, let me say that whatever you've read about the O'Neill funeral in the newspapers, it's not true. Well, most of it. Some of it is true, just not the worst parts. We're not angels, you understand, but we're not monsters either. No one hits a dead body with a steel chair unless they've got a real good reason. Those reporters didn't talk about that, even though we tried to tell them. Everyone in this town has always hated the O'Neills. The only one of us who ever got any respect was my cousin Raina, and that was because she married Brucey, who was a sheriff's deputy. Then, even that got fucked up. Raina used to work the night shift at the Loaf and Jug out by the county line, and when people would come in with so much as a whiff of alcohol on them, she'd wait for them to leave and call it into Brucey. For a while there, it got to where he was giving out so many DUIs, the boys at the department started thinking he was a psychic. When someone finally put it all together, Brucey was fine as paint, but Raina's, and by extension, our family's reputation, went back into the shitter further than it had before. Now, we weren't just dumb, dirty hicks, we were narcs too. Given all that, I don't know why I expected the assembled people of Larimer County to do anything except kick us when we were down, to give us the littlest bit of sympathy for the people we lost, for the things we saw, because they sure as shit didn't. Now, we're out here bleeding to death while everyone just points and laughs. When I said before that we weren't monsters, I should have built in a little exception for Uncle Randy. Uncle Randy was a real piece of shit, and there isn't a single member of the O'Neill family who'd have said otherwise unless it was Randy himself doing the asking. Exactly how he was related to us is a family secret lost to me. We just knew he was kin, for better or worse. He was a huge man, too, 6'6" easy, without an ounce of fat on him, and meaner than a cornered badger. He also had, and I mean this with the deadliest of seriousness, the strength of 10 men. There are family stories going back 2 generations about Randy lifting or pulling things of such weight and size they should have required a team of horses. If that isn't enough to drive it home, there are other family stories about what Randy could do, ones they're not fond of telling. For example, he once killed a man outside the Longhorn Tavern for stepping on his good shoes. According to people who were there, Randy was drunker than any man on God's earth has ever been, and he bumped into Calvin Robinson, who used to be a milliner in town. Whether or not any shoes were actually stepped on is a matter of debate. What is generally agreed upon is that Randy wheeled on Cal in a rage and battered him to the ground with a thunderous right hook. Randy then dropped one tree trunk-like knee across the downed man's neck, starting to furiously rant about respect and the cost of a good pair of shoes. Half-conscious, Cal feebly tried to free himself, his hands weakly beating against Randy's trousers. His eyes ablaze, Randy looked around at the gathering crowd, settling finally onto Robinson's screaming fiancée. He stayed fixed on her, a smile on his face as he reached down to rest the fingers of one hand on the soft part of the belly, just below the rib cage. Cal cried out as Randy's iron grip dug into the flesh, burrowing into the skin until he was gripping bone. He then did the same with the man's pelvis, freshets of blood pouring from the place where his fingers had forced themselves inside. A constable had arrived at this point, too afraid of Randy to put hands on him, but warning him against hurting Cal any more than he already had. Randy didn't even acknowledge him with so much as a look. Instead, he pulled his hands in opposite directions, tearing a terrified Calvin Robinson in half right in front of the woman he loved. People fight about that story not because they think it didn't happen. It's the timeline that doesn't make any sense. Calvin Robinson's tombstone lists his date of death as 1925. If Randy killed him, it means he was close to, if not more than 100 years old when he died. Both times. We think it was his ticker that did him in the first time. There was an old mine on his property where Randy used to spend a lot of his time. It was weird, but the more time he spent in the mine, the less time he spent around town spouting insane shit about old magic and putting his hand up waitresses' skirts, so we kept our observations to ourselves. 6 weeks ago, we had a tremor run through town, enough to rattle the beer bottles hanging from the trees in my front yard and leave everything else alone, or so we thought. As it turns out, that little tingler was centered just north of Randy's property and shook it enough to bring half the hillside down on top of the mine entrance. Bill Gullickson, another old-timer and one of the few people who could stand being around Randy long enough to drink with him, turned up to his house with a half sack of beer, only to find Randy had given himself the big clutcher trying to dig his way back into the tunnel. The day of the funeral was warm for November. Parking at Stepperton's mortuary is for shit, so I had to leave my truck at the credit union and walk back over. By the time I got there, my Goodwill suit was sweaty and scratching at me, and everyone was already inside, so I pushed open the flimsy white doors and stepped into the lobby. It was a small room, the walls painted what I think was meant to be a calming, dusky pink with a handful of yellowed pamphlets on grieving stuffed into a ramshackle display rack. Stepperson's receptionist, Danny, was sitting at the front desk, looking bored. She was the reason we'd had the funeral here, and Roz had talked her into starting a little side business together, selling cigarettes dipped in embalming fluid to kids at the high school. Danny was able to get Mr. Stepperson to give us a discount so long as we promise not to tell anyone outside the family we'd had an O'Neill funeral on the premises. Danny looked at me dully and nodded in the direction of Chapel A at the end of a long hallway. The carpet was a faded blue and so thick it felt like every step sunk me a half-inch closer to hell. Chapel A was the biggest in the building and was just about full when I walked in, with every single person either being blood or kin to blood. For a family who doesn't much like each other, we've always been able to pull it together when the chips are down. If one O'Neill eats, we all eat, and if one O'Neill dies, even if he was a bastard like Randy, we all pay our respects. Or at least we did. Ask me again after all the funerals we got coming up. The casket at the front of the chapel was closed because Aunt Roz had given Randy's only suit to our cousin Trevor, who was giving the eulogy. Calling the suit too big doesn't do it justice. The sleeves and cuffs were rolled so far up Trevor's limbs it looked like he was being swallowed. Mr. Stapperson did his best to shepherd us through the ceremony, even if I doubt he's heard the word fuck so many times in a 5-minute eulogy. Trevor was given the job because he'd spent more time with Randy than anyone except for Bill Gullickson, owing to their mutual enthusiasm for stealing pseudo from drugstores and cooking it into meth. If Roz thought this man he'd have more to say about the man than anyone else, she was dead wrong. The profanity helped lengthen what was otherwise a lot of crying and the word brother interspersed between sentiments like you were one of a kind, and at the end, Trevor blew his nose into a balled-up tissue which he then jammed down deep inside the front pocket of his borrowed outfit. He then shuffled over to the casket, careful not to trip on the fabric puddled at his feet, and thumped the lid twice. There was barely time for a "see you on the other side, brother," before it happened. Something on the inside of the casket thumped back. Instantly, it was like the air had been sucked out of the room. Trevor, his face a mask of shock, pounded again on the top of the cheap wooden box. Another muffled thud came in response. A murmuring rose up among the assembled family. Was Randy alive? If so, was there any way for him to know who had taken his gun collection? Trevor, his bearded face red and swollen from crying, shouted Randy's name, and the thumping from inside the box grew in volume and frequency. "He's alive!" Trevor shouted. "He's alive in there! Randy, we're coming for you, brother!" With that, he started frantically untwisting the fasteners, holding down the upper half of the casket's top until he threw it open. The family was in full uproar now, standing and trying to see past Trevor, who was blocking their view of Randy. Being at the back and one of the shorter people in the room, I couldn't see anything except the rumpled backs of secondhand suits and returnable Kmart dresses, their white tags dangling. One time when we were kids, my brother Marty and I broke into a neighbor's house when they were away on vacation. It wasn't a malicious thing, but they had a nice house, which was a novelty to us, and we wanted to see what the inside of one looked like. Marty had tried to show he wasn't impressed by talking shit about the cream-colored curtains and immaculate kitchen countertops. Finally, for reasons I still don't understand, he declared the carburetor to be rich people bullshit and stuck his hand down into it before turning it on. There had been a moment of mechanical whine as the mechanism spun up, then a wet, pulpy crunch as it sent a gout of blood and bone chips straight up into his face. That was the sound I heard from the front of the chapel where Trevor had just stuck his head into Randy's casket. Just like with the garbage disposal, there was the briefest sound beforehand, a muffled scream here instead of a mechanical whine, and then a spray of bright red erupted into my eyeline, spattering droplets across the chapel's white ceiling. A moment of silence followed before it exploded into a chorus of screams. It was chaos. Family members peeling off left and right, tripping over each other as they raced for the door behind me. My view of the catafalque and Randy's casket was restored just in time for me to see Trevor's headless body collapse backward onto the floor, blood oozing from his neck into the thick blue rug. Above him, Randy sat up, his eyes taped shut, his mouth sewn closed. He turned toward the screaming, sunlight from the frosted glass windows making his nude, hairless torso gleam. In the moments before he used his considerable bulk to roll himself and his final resting place off onto the ground, I saw something under the blood spatter on his wide stomach that defied all logic. I shook my head. I couldn't have seen that, I thought, but then Randy wriggled free of his confines to stand, facing forward at the front of the room. Across his belly was an angry red line, something I'd have thought was part of the embalming process, if not for the fact it separated to reveal row upon row of razor-sharp teeth. Randy's other mouth opened wider, impossibly so. Trevor's wine-dark arterial blood mixed with yellow embalming fluid as they drooled out over a black, rotten tongue. I'd heard of moments where your reason turns off and you become a creature of pure panic, but until then, I never thought it was something I'd experience. In mute, uncomprehending silence, I watched poor, fat Uncle Craig rush Randy, only to fail to that famous right hook. Craig hit the ground like a box of someone else's freight, falling off the back of a truck, moaning, the noise like a homing beacon to the sightless dead man. Randy cocked an ear before locking in Craig's location and reaching down with his thickly muscled arms to pick up the prone man, all 250 pounds of him. Randy folded Craig in half like a slice of cheap pizza, squishing his moans down into a gurgle. Even amid the screams coming from all corners of the room, I could hear still Craig's breath whistling in his heavy, compressed lungs as Randy began feeding him to his other mouth head first. The powerful jaws bit through my uncle's rib cage as easily as if it was canned salmon, bones and all. The other mouth smacked and slurped at its twitching, now lifeless prize. Fallen clots of blood and brain matter covered Randy's bare feet, his toes wriggling in the mess as if he was stirring up sand at the beach. It was then that Rolly, my cousin Annie's husband, came in with the steel chair that would become so famous in the newspaper coverage. He was screaming a sort of war whoop, bringing the weapon down square into Randy's face with a clang. Randy stumbled back, his arms pulling Craig's mutilated corpse away from the other mouth, which roared in protest, its ersatz lips sticking out like a nursing baby whose mother had pulled away her nipple. Rolly pulled his arms back and delivered another heavy blow to the dead man, the chair flattening his nose. Other Mouth roared again, and Randy kicked Rolly so hard in the chest the crack rang out like a gunshot. Rolly's face immediately went slack, and he dropped to his knees, lolling forward. Dimly, I heard Annie screaming his name. Craig's mangled remains were tossed aside, and Randy blindly reached out to find Rolly, settling on his shoulders. The dead man stepped forward, and I remember thinking just for a second that he looked like a priest about to give a benediction. Of course, what came next wasn't a benediction. Instead, the only difference between it and what happened to Craig was the other mouth ate Rolly's entire body tip to toes. Another oddly calm thought rose up in me. Where's all that food going? Its meal finished, Othermouth let out an obscene, foul-smelling burp, and that was the starter pistol for my fight-or-flight response. Suddenly, I could move, and there wasn't a hope in hell I was going to fight. I ran for the door, past the still screaming Annie and a very pale Danny who couldn't seem to reconcile her heretofore boring day with the abattoir in front of her. I hit the front door of Stepperson's like a wrecking ball, knocking one of them clear off the hinges, and as I would realize later, dislocating my shoulder in the process. When I finally came out of that panicked haze, the sun had set and I was hunched down in a copse of trees, shivering. My jacket was gone, my shoes shredded. I took a deep breath and got to my feet, wincing at the ache in my shoulder. The underbrush bit into the soles of my feet. It was so dark that I wasn't sure which way to start walking until I saw headlights pass by in the distance. Stumbling over roots and branches, I finally reached the asphalt and started walking until I found a route marker that put me around 8 miles outside town. Eventually, a wiry Mexican kid in a beat-up El Camino gave me a lift most of the way back to civilization. The streets were as quiet as ever, so I reasoned that Randy had either been stopped or killed everyone, and either way, I was going to go home. As it turned out, it had been a little of both. A dozen sheriff's deputies had pumped bullets into my uncle until he hit the pavement, and I suspect for a little while after. Even though some of them had admitted to reloading their weapon more than once, not one of those deputies would admit to seeing Othermouth, which was gone by the time paramedics arrived on the scene. Aside from a couple mangled corpses and some missing family members, there was no way to prove our version of events to authorities or the newspapers. Not that anyone would ever actually listen to what an O'Neill has to say anyway. Media ran with this story. You probably read by now, where we almost buried one of our own alive and he woke up again at the funeral, taking a chair to the face before police bravely filled him with enough lead to sink the Bismarck. You might not believe me either, but at least the story is out there now. For people with sense enough to listen.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast before the server goes offline.